Okay, you guys talk. I'm gonna get my power.
Hey, listen, I'm gonna tell you guys something that happened to me today, right? So, as you guys know, I'm doing the lookup on the Breonna Taylor case, right? You know how I like to do the police shooting cases. So, I'm going through all the information. So I'm going over it with my wife. Now, my wife is you think I'm lefty. She's like, way like Breonna Taylor was murdered and all this. So I'm like, okay. So we went through all of the evidence that I found. The warrant, because you know me, I like to go through the warrant. I like to go with the background was. So I go through all of that. And after that, she said, "Oh my God, the media has lied to me." I'm like, now you know how I feel. yes, they've been lying to you. Now you know how I feel. So it's been insane, and I'm actually honestly scared to now make this video, because I believe there's going to be like a little backlash against me, because I don't think anybody really knows the facts of the case. Like the facts that have been put out there have been just straight up lies. I don't like even with remember the Georgia case with the cop. And they were saying that a taser is not a deadly weapon. It's like, why do they just make up lies like that? The Supreme Court, just like last year, said it was a deadly weapon, and now they're going to come and say it's not when a cop. It's like, it's insane. I'm sorry, I'm getting on my high horse and pearl clutching a little bit here. So
but Nate, I think we may as well just start on this subject and then move into SCOTUS, because
Sorry, so I was just gonna ask Nate if he saw Cheryl Dorsey, this retired sergeant from the Los Angeles Police Department, was on MSNBC and called the Black Kentucky Republican Attorney General, who said, not so much for the charges, called him skin folk, not kinfolk, because he's not really black, because he reached the wrong conclusion despite being a black attorney general.
You know what? When it's funny.
Skin folk. Good.
No, it's you guys may not understand this, but when I saw him, I didn't even think about his political affiliation. I just thought I was proud to see someone who was up there as a black man in that position, coming to a decision that was not political, that was just based on the facts. Most people don't know Breonna Taylor's house was considered just to go into it, drugs were being delivered to Breonna Taylor's house. Most people don't realize that. Most people don't realize that she was questioned for a murder that was committed in a car that she rented. Most people don't realize that. Most people don't know. Most people do not know that the way it was working was her ex-boyfriend was getting drugs delivered to her house, and they have all this on camera. They have all this on tape. They followed. Well, let me bring it back, because I know a lot of people out there don't know the terms I'm going to be using. In the hood, we have you might have heard of the term crack house. Now, crack house is actually a term used with what we call a trap house. A trap house is a place where people sell drugs out of a trap house. So people come, and it's easy for cops to find trap houses is because there's a lot of foot traffic. If you're in a residential neighborhood and you got a lot of foot houses going to a house, you know that there's something fishy going on. So we call those trap houses, and they're easy to spot. And in the Breonna Taylor case, there were a lot of people calling about a trap house that was in the neighborhood. So police went to that trap house and raided that trap house. After they raided the trap house, then you try to find the distribution chain. Now, the trap house usually gets its drugs from what we call a stash house. A stash house is the place where the drugs and money come into, and then they're distributed to the trap houses. So the police, after finding the trap house, they then surveilled the trap house and then found out where the drugs were coming from. And the stash house for 3 of these trap houses were Breonna Taylor's apartment. That's where the drugs were. And they have surveillance of the cars going from the trap houses to Breonna Taylor's house, picking up drugs, then taking them back directly to the various drug locations, to the various trap houses. Breonna Taylor was caught on a phone call when her boyfriend, the ex-boyfriend, got arrested. She was caught on the phone call. Quote, the other guy who was arrested, he's back in the trap house. So she knew what was going on. But see, the thing is that most people who've heard the story know nothing about this. They hear that she's an EMT. They don't hear that she's on the phone talking about, going to trap houses and all this stuff. And don't get me wrong, I do understand. Like one of the big issues too is about the no-knock warrant. People will say, well, it was, it's a no-knock warrant, and now they've outlawed no-knock warrants. The cops knocked. The cops knocked on the door, and that was the problem. They knocked. They should not have knocked, and the fact that they knocked, that was the problem. It wasn't the fact that they did get a no-knock warrant, but they didn't use the no-knock warrant. They stupidly knocked. So it's all, there's a lot of misinformation out there that I try. I'm gonna, you know how I do. I pull it apart in the video. So when the video comes out, you'll be well to see it.
Two things. So someone had said, Nate, do not be afraid to speak truth to lies. So many don't know the truth. And incidentally, Nate, if you were not reading the chats before went live, apparently people think you have a leftist bias, which I don't know. They may reassess after this next video. When does the video drop? And then I want to ask Barnes a question.
I'm sorry. The next video it's going to be Charlie dropping tomorrow because I'm still doing more and more research. But it should be I should be finishing up tonight and editing out. So it'll be out tomorrow. The Breonna Taylor video. So
okay. And now, Robert, we've talked about this many times. You have a philosophy which seems to be panning out to be true more often than not, that once these big cases go public, or the ones that get picked up by the media, tend to be the worst civil rights cases. I'm not sure how much of the facts that Nate just mentioned you're familiar with, but I mean, what's your take on Breonna Taylor?
I mean, I think it's a mixed story. I think when we did our, I think we covered this maybe a month ago. I went back and watched part of it actually, and I think we predicted about 99% of what happened. Because what we went through, that it wasn't the clean case that the media was presenting it as, but that there probably were problems in the way Louisville's PD handles warrants, because some of what Nate is describing was not in the warrant. Some was, some wasn't, but there are other problems, I think, with the warrant. The best evidence that there are probably problems with the warrant, the city of Louisville settled that case quickly. They paid your family $12 million. I can tell you that cities don't write that kind of check unless there's some discovery they don't want out in the open. So my guess, but for folks out there, there's two separate parts of the case that the media isn't fairly describing. The Attorney General for Kentucky tried to get into it yesterday. Everything about the warrant is not what he was investigating. Everything about the warrant is what the FBI is investigating. He was only looking at the 3 officers who did the shooting. And the 3 officers who did the shooting had nothing to do with the warrant. So, I mean, Nate can attest to, as being a former police officer, these are cops called in to just execute a warrant. All they know is what they're told. And they clearly were given the impression that this was maybe an impression that wasn't necessarily as justified by scoping out the property as much as I think they should have. But and there was one cop, the cop we mentioned on our broadcast, that I said there was one cop with a bad history. He's the one who was charged with reckless endangerment because he just went bum, 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 bum. He was outside the building and he had like 10 shots, and a bunch of them went into the neighboring apartment. And there was a pregnant mother and a little kid in that apartment. I mean, it was a miracle nobody else died. The other 2 cops had always much cleaner case because they come in the door, they get shot. And one gets shot, and then they fire back at the direction that they got shot at. And I think they only shot 6, I think somewhere between 7 to 10 times. One problem I had with the Kentucky Attorney General yesterday was a little vague on all the shots. Like, for example, I'm a little curious how they came to the conclusion of what the bullet was that was the deadly bullet. It's like my understanding is there was a 15-minute delay between the entry to the property and her time of death, according to the coroner. That 6 bullets went into her. How exactly they figure out which one was the deadly one?
There was a split from the labs too, because the Kentucky Attorney General said the in-house lab couldn't come to a conclusion, and then they used some sort of outhouse lab. Was it FBI? But they were able to come to a conclusion. Yeah,
the FBI did come to a conclusion, and the FBI said that what the bullet was. I can see why my friends on the left or on the skeptical side of this case are skeptical of how that transpired. It's kind of like the George Floyd case, why the Uncivil Law has talked about it. The prosecutors DQ'd up there. The skepticism by the judge, I suspect, up there is he doesn't like that they decided to meet without a witness because he's concerned that there's going to be an allegation that they coerced the coroner's testimony. The coroner changed his mind, and the coroner won't admit it, and so on and so forth. The defense lawyer is clearly already trying to hint at that. We don't have a full record because apparently that was said verbally, and then the judge issued his opinion, and the state asked for reconsideration. It was a highly unusual disqualification, I can tell you that. But that tells me that there's probably more there than what the judge maybe put in the ruling. But so I think from the Breonna Taylor side of the equation, it would be concern as to whether or not that they still dispute whether there was an announce. There was no dispute my understanding back when we talked, Viva, was that my understanding at that time was that there was no dispute that the knock took place. Now,
That they did in fact knock. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what the guy who shot back said. He said, I heard a bunch of noise. I heard a bunch of pounding at the door, and I didn't know who it was. The dispute is whether there was an announce. They apparently now have one witness who said he heard them announce police, though there again, the Kentucky Attorney General was a little vague about what exactly that witness said. So again, I think Nate is fundamentally right that most of the facts were badly misled. A lot of the media coverage focused on the fact that the warrant was a no-knock warrant without disclosing the fact that it was mostly uncontroverted, as far as I knew, that in fact the knock occurred. The disputed part was whether an announcement occurred. Based on the 911 call made by the person who shot back, he clearly didn't know they were police. Put it this way, it's pretty weird to call 911 if you think that's the police coming in your door. And then the worst problem for the cops at the time was they didn't find anything. If they had found a money stash, if they had found a drug stash, the case would have presented easier. The other problem was it appears that some cops lied in this post report. Like they filed a report that said there was no forced entry. Apparently they used the ram to enter the door. That's usually the definition of a forced entry. So I think what happened is it went AWOL largely, and that the three cops who were involved in the shooting were being treated as fall guys. Now, one of them has been dumb enough to do drunk emails at 2 in the morning, writing to the entire PD about how the FBI is a bunch of pussies and so on and so forth, stuff that's very ill-advised. When he writes it at 2:15 in the morning and he himself says he's rambling in the email, he should have put in some algorithm to his email so that it would stop it from. My brother had to do this years ago. He had to put an algorithm in to stop him from responding to people when he got ticked off, because he'd be like, oh man, I shouldn't have said that. So I think Nate's fundamentally correct. Most of the facts were not known because the media lied about it. And it does go back, whenever BLM celebrates a case, they lie about it. We talked about Viva, what Crump put in the lawsuit. He didn't even talk about the fact that he shot back, and he probably shot back first. And he didn't, the guy who they originally tried to they originally prosecuted and then they dropped the charges, who shot back first. Because you can't have a situation, folks, where both sides have self-defense, because both sides don't, from their perspective, they think they're defending themselves. The evidence was that was the case. But I do have doubts about whether the cops definitely announced or not. Unfortunately, it turns out in Louisville PD, the only people who wear body cameras are the patrol cops, not the people executing a search warrant like that. That's why I say, I think if you dig in, I think what's happening here is these three cops were being used as fall guys for the screw ups in the warrant process, issues with body cameras, issues with what happened afterwards that go to the higher ups. And the higher ups are probably the ones that are under major criminal investigation by the FBI. And they were looking at any excuse to say, no, these are just a couple of idiot cops who did the wrong thing. It's not because we have systematic issues with it. Like, it's clear, like, for example, they apparently came out afterwards. They didn't know whether there were kids there. They didn't know whether there were animals there.
They had no ambulance route for just in case.
This is, as Nate can attest, that's a sign of a poorly prepared warrant. So they brought in these three guys to just take all the heat. And I think two of them got unfair heat. The third guy that shot too much, especially had a history of it. I support the reckless endangerment prosecution of it.
Yeah, you know what? Well, it's interesting because whenever you like, I've done many of these warrants, right? I've done many of the warrants based on informants, and I wrote some of these warrants when I was at both the Brooklyn DA and the Bronx DA. And one thing, especially with a no-knock warrant, one of the most surprising pieces of it is, why would you only use a 3-man team to issue a no-knock warrant, especially if you think there's going to be, because the warrants that they had executed warrants previously to some of these locations, and you find guns, you find knives, you got people who are running from the police. So to issue a no-knock warrant, you know that there's going to be some issue of violence there. So two things, why would I just have a 3-man team, 2 in the door and 1 by the window? And then also, 2, why wouldn't I go in hard? Why knock at all, right? Because if you are going to knock, for those of you who don't know how it usually works, if you're going to execute a warrant, it's not like TV where you're just banging through the door. No. If I'm executing a warrant, that's a knock warrant. It's a knock and announce. You knock on the door, the person opens the door, we got a warrant, and we rush in. That's generally the way it works. It's not boom, 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 police. Sometimes if the judge doesn't want to give you a no-knock warrant, you'll do a hard entry like that. But 99% of the time, it's a simple knock on the door. the person comes and opens the door and you rush in. That's generally the way it would work. But in this case, to have a no knock and then knock, it doesn't make any, it just didn't make any sense. And then usually you have a surveillance team there for a couple of hours to surveil the area. Are there kids? Who's going into the house? So you kind of have a good idea of what's going on before you send people in. But now it seems like these 3 cops just showed up to a door and was like, we're going inside there. That's TV stuff again. And TV, you hear that, let's go to the house and knock down the door. No, you surveil it 5-6 hours. Who's in? You got kids in there. Who have you seen coming in and coming out? That's generally the way it works. So yeah, so I think there's a lot of problems with the process. I think they got lax. But if you're talking about this, just the use of force criteria, when the 2 cops who got shot at, they returned fire knowing where their target was. The 3rd cop, he heard the shots, heard over the radio, police got shot, and he just fired blindly into a location. That cop, that's reckless endangerment. No, there's no jurisdiction on the planet that's going to allow you just to shoot blindly into a space, even if you heard shots fired, because you don't know who's fired. They could be cops, for instance, shooting those shots. So yes, so that was, and that's why he was fired. But the other side, where that the big issue is, why would you send a 3-man team to a hot warrant to a stash house where you think drugs, guns, and money are going to be, and a registered gun owner is living there too? Yeah, it's just there's a huge mess in the procedure, and I agree with Robert. There's more here on the police side, and that's probably the reason why they gave $12 million.
So Nate,
and plus Nate, you can probably speak to this. This is also an apartment building, so this
Yes.
isn't like a house. So the capacity for things to go sideways are off the charts.
Yes.
So that's why there's usually a lot of protective procedures. And the other component that Nate highlights, you almost never, when you have a no-knock authority, and maybe they were told by the judge, I really want it to be a knock and announce, but then that's on the judge to change the warrant. But it's very rare you hear 3 knocks and then take the ram and break down the door.
Why bring the ram?
Exactly. It doesn't make sense.
so
it doesn't make sense.
we'll bring up this saber chat, which has been here for a while. The bad optics of the officers being in plain clothes. Now a question for all of you. Should officers serving warrants have to have plain visual identifiers that officers are police, not just vocal? Because this is the one thing everybody says, oh, great. Now criminals know how to bust into somebody's house. Just say you're the cops and then enter, and then they can't defend themselves. So the no-knock warrants versus the knock warrants, we discussed the risks of both, especially the risks of knocking when you have a no-knock. You give them a chance to arm up. But plainclothes officers, how does that work in the context of this type of raid, for lack of a better word?
Well, let me. Well, first, there's a warrant. Well, if you're executing a warrant, the element of surprise, no matter if you knock or you don't knock, right? The knock and announce is a common law thing where you're going to execute, you got to knock and announce. Now, to be honest with you, constitutionally, you don't have to knock and announce. If you bust into the house and get whatever it's not, the evidence that you find is not going to be excluded. There may be some civil penalties, like in this case, but you don't. The requirement is not that knocking doesn't permit the evidence from not being used in court. So cops do it as a courtesy and do it to avoid civil liability. But you can just bust through the door. Now, the reason why cops generally, like in this particular case, when they had the first 3 raids, right? Because they had 3 raids, and most people don't realize this was a 4th raid encompassing from the information from the first 3 raids of the trap houses. So this was okay. Now because cops like to move up the chain. We're going to the distribution center. So what happens is, when they raided the first 3 houses, they found surveillance equipment, and what these people were doing was they would have cameras all around the property. And if you see cops coming toward the property in police cars, what you would do is you start destroying all the drugs, destroying all the evidence. And this is why, if you look at some of the charges from the people in Breonna Taylor's case, tampering with evidence, destroying evidence. That's what some of the things that they were charged with. So in this case, you want plainclothes officers to go because you want to keep that element of surprise when they get to the house. And that's what you were looking for here. But again, even though the way you would usually do it is that you would have your patrol cars, the people with the uniforms, maybe a block or 2 blocks away, where they will not get caught on surveillance. You got your plainclothes team go in. They then set up, right? Because now you got your surveillance team who's already been there, who's already telling you, all right, there's 2 people in there, blah, 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 blah. You set up, you go in hard, you don't knock, because the reason why these cops even got shot is because they knocked. If they went in hot and ran into then it doesn't give that guy time to get his gun. That's the reason why you get the no-knock warrant. You get the no-knock warrant to prepare the person in there so he can't get the gun. You go in hot, you grab it. But again, a 2-man team, very suspicious. Usually you want more because, and you get a layout of the house. So that's the reason why it's better to go plain clothes, especially if you're going no knock, because you want to keep that element of surprise. If you got people going in uniform, evidence is going to be lost. I know that was a little long-winded, but that's generally the way it works.
And we have a disagreement, or at least a question of fact. They hit multiple houses that night. At the briefing, Breonna's was downgraded to low threat. Warrant was changed to a knock and announce. Nate,
no, I've seen the warrant. I got the warrant. It's not. The warrant was
the warrant was never changed. Yeah,
the warrant wasn't changed.
Apparently, they internally decided to knock and announce, but that means they've got a completely conflicting messages going in. That's just a disaster waiting to happen. One, if it's low threat, then you don't even need to go in at 12:30. I mean, that's the other problem. When you're doing a hybrid no knock and not, you normally do not do knock and announce at after midnight.
No,
because people are going to get confused. They don't know what's going on. I represented some people in the alternative product distribution business, and they're highly sensitive to people trying to rob them at that time frame. And so they came out guns blazing, but they knew how to handle it and chilled everybody out. But the probability of shooting back is always sky high when you do it the way they did it. And that, again, that's 90% of that is on. I put only a little bit on the people executing the warrant just because one of them was a sergeant, so he should have asked some of these questions, I think. And as he should have been, hold on a second, there's a problem here, there's a problem here, there's a problem here. But it appears they were accustomed to following whatever the direction was, rather than, like, if Nate was there, it would have been, hold on, we're doing this, or this. Why aren't we doing this, or this? So that's why I say there's a systemic problem, I think, in Louisville PD. There was some problem where the questions that cops that do this every day would ask somehow didn't get asked. And it's to avoid problems exactly like this from occurring. But it was never the case that they went in to murder Breonna Taylor.
No.
That was always a lie. The NBA players were lying, and Major League Baseball was lying. The media was lying. And I do believe they often do it deliberately because they like divisive cases, because uniting cases lead to reform, but they also don't lead to political revolution. And if you believe in political revolution as your premise, as BLM does, then you need divisive cases. And you only get divisive cases if the facts aren't really good when you dig into them, because otherwise you want to have two people on both sides. If everybody looks at the case and says, oh, that's a bad case, you're going to have 90% of the people agree with you. There aren't 90% of the people, well, maybe some of the people backing Amy Coney Barrett, a little authoritarian wannabes, South Park Cartman cop wannabes. Maybe some of them will, but aside from them, the rest of us are still sane and don't support police abuse if the facts actually prove.
Wait, now hold on. The speaking conch is going to Kurt.
Yeah, well, putting aside the Amy Coney Barrett comment for the moment, it seems to me, first of all, it's my understanding that they were doing multiple simultaneous warrant executions. So there's more than one going on at the same time. So I could certainly understand why in the dynamics of trying to figure that out and trying to figure out where your resources need to be at any given moment, why you would change on the fly, even though you had the latitude to go for the no knock, that you would say, well, our resources need to be here otherwise, because presumably they had surveilled the property in the past, so they had a general idea of who might be there at any time. And so that's one of the reasons they said, well, it's low risk right now. And
apparently they didn't, Kurt. Apparently, according to
at
least from what I've heard so far, is that apparently the cops said that the ones that went in, they said, do you know who's in there? They said, no. They said, if any kids are in there? We don't think so, but no.
That's a problem. That's a problem.
Yeah. I mean,
you don't go. Like there's no way in New York where you go into a place not knowing who's in there. It just doesn't happen. It's just because you got somebody sitting in the house. Especially
you don't know who's next, who's nearby, who's on top, who's below. If you really think this is a drug issue, you want to know who the neighbors are. You want to know it's not uncommon to have multiple of those units controlled by people. So you might be coming out and being hit from the side or from the next place. You don't know. You don't know where the exit points are. This was a warrant. This was a disaster of a warrant. And I don't blame the cops who executed it. Only a little bit. It'd be better if they'd asked questions like the Floyd cops. Maybe 8.5 minutes too long. Maybe say something. Maybe at some point you do have an affirmative obligation, even if that guy is superior in command. But by no means are they mostly responsible. And no. They didn't set in to kill her, and there isn't a valid murder charge unless one of the reckless endangerment.
It just seems to me, I want to assume that they're rational actors and professionals, and that they have protocols that they normally follow. So, I obviously understand that police can do bad things and mess up, and there can be systemic problems. But all that being said, I don't want to necessarily assume that without evidence. I want to go the other way and give at least the benefit of doubt and say, look, these guys are professionals. This is probably not their first drug raid. They probably had reasons for doing the things they did in the way they did it and evaluated things on good faith. Now, that may prove not to be true in the end. And Robert's point that maybe the reason they sell it for $12 million is specifically because there's a lot of dirty laundry behind the day. Maybe that's the reason. But all that being said, I'm a little uncomfortable just assuming that. So I want to assume good faith and try to figure out, why might they have made the decisions they did? Does it make sense? And so that's kind of where I'm trying to start from.
If it just going on what you just said doesn't make sense, I'll tell you this: you don't do knock warrants at midnight. Why? Because if somebody's knocking on your door at midnight, there's already a problem, right? If somebody comes and knocks on your door right now at midnight, Viva, do you think if they're coming to deliver something versus midday?
I'm calling the cops if that happens.
If they are the cops, that's why if you're going in no knock, you're going no knock when people are sleeping. Why? Because it's going to be harder for them. It's dark inside the house. They're looking for stuff. Oh my God, where's my gun? That's why you go in at night. But
well, I don't necessarily like the implications of that, because there are a lot of people, including me, who question the existence of no-knock warrants as an idea. And that would mean that if we got rid of no-knock warrants, it would mean that we couldn't serve warrants, after dusk and before dawn, which maybe that's the way we're going. But it seems problematic.
I'm saying you can serve no-knock, like you could serve knock warrants whenever, but it's just as a tactical matter. If I want to serve a warrant on you, I want to serve it, number one, when you're there, when I think the contraband is there. And I'd rather just come knock at your door at 5 o'clock. Why? Because you're going to open up the door, unbeknownst to you. Oh my God, the police are here. And then we bust in. That is the way 99% of warrants are done. If I'm coming in no knock, it's because I think you got guns and I think my safety's in jeopardy. So I want to rush in to make sure it's dark. So you're fumbling around in the dark and you have no opportunity to grab your weapons. I know Barnes. You know the game, right? This is the way it's played.
Almost all your knock and announce warrants are usually 6 a.m., 7 a.m.
Yeah.
They go in early in the morning, right about when you're waking up, knock to get everything done. They're there all day. They want to interrogate while you're awake. They don't like going in between midnight and 5 a.m. because people might be drunk, people might be high. You might, there may be you people are going to be at maximum state of confusion. You're not going to have a lot of light. So it's these kind of problems, these kind of shootings. Disproportionate risk goes up when you do a knock and announce between midnight and 5 a.m. So they generally avoid that for a whole bunch of reasons. Definitely in an apartment building, because you don't know who's coming at you from different sides, what else is going to happen. You want it to be bright. You want it to be bright and early in the morning, and you want to be their wake-up call. You want to be their alarm clock, but you want it to be around the time of an alarm clock. And if you're going to do a no-knock, you're going to do it the way they did it to poor Paul Manafort, where he and his wife were naked in bed, woke up to guys with guns. So that's normally the procedure to avoid all of these risks that we're identifying. And it's not legally required. It's just tactically wise.
Before, I have one question for Nate, who I know knows the facts better, but I want to read Little Rock's chat. He says, I told you guys I had a client meeting at 6 p.m. and to wait until 6:30. Now you have to catch me up. Sarcasm. Glad all four of you are here explaining all of this. I wished it was on CNN, MSNBC, Fox. Better chance of us being on Fox than CNN, I think. But Nate, this is the question. I mean, I'm waiting for your video. I'm waiting for the facts. I know people have been tweeting out today, about this murder investigation into a car that Breonna had rented years ago. I know my initial reaction is the same that I had with George Floyd. I don't care about past criminal history on the day of the event unless it's somehow factored in to the events. So did these cops know that there was this investigation? Was that a relevant factor in anything of the warrant? I mean, was that a relevant factor the day of the incident? Nate, you're on mute.
I would say no. For the reason why is because I don't think it's like, I'm not even going to mention it in my video because I don't think it's relevant. But what I do think is relevant is the relationship to the other raids that were happening. Because don't forget, there were 3 other raids that had happened before at these stash houses. And the reason why they were raiding this place was because they had a definite connection between her place and these 3 distribution centers. Like they literally had cars going from her place to these 3 stash houses, and the packages being delivered to her house. I think they even questioned the postal inspector to say, that they're getting all these packages for her ex-boyfriend, and the ex-boyfriend would go pick up the packages and the police would surveil him to the stash houses. So that's what that's what seemed to be relevant. So a lot of the news media was saying, number one, this was because it was a no-knock warrant, right? The police didn't knock. Well, they did. They were saying that the police didn't announce. Now the DA said that they had a witness, a next door neighbor, who heard them bang, 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 and heard police. That, and they believe that witness is credible because that witness is, is disinterested from the case. It's just like, it's a next door neighbor. Why would and that was a first impression. Hey, what did you hear? We heard the police bang, 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 police. That changes the narrative. And then the second piece of it is that the narrative is that this is some innocent bystander who just happens to be there and been gunned down. And that's and the fear is that it's making, I think, people think that I can be laying in my bed and the police will come running in my house, shooting up the wrong house. That's not what happened here, right? That's not what happened here. Breonna Taylor's name was on the warrant, right? The person who literally was arrested, who she bailed out for distribution of narcotics, his home address was Breonna Taylor's home address. And I think people just don't realize how now don't get me wrong, she could have been trying to get out of the game, which is possible. But at this moment, her address is being used by felons who are distributing narcotics. They are traveling to her house, to the stash houses every day. They are in a car registered to her name, going back and forth. A car that she had rented had there was a murder that occurred in it. So it wasn't like this was some fawn in the woods. There's a lot of facts. The reasons why the police were there, I think, were right, but I think the warrant could have been done better, and I think the execution of the warrant. And that's what we always said when I was in the academy. I used to always say bad tactics lead to bad use of force, and that's what happened here. These were poor tactics because if you have a no-knock warrant, you're going no-knock. But since you knocked, that allowed this guy to get his gun, and now you have this huge problem. Bad tactics lead to bad use of force.
That's also part of the reason that I question the idea that there might have been a problem in the warrant, because even if there was some kind of problem in the warrant, if the police knew all that things and they spoke to the postal inspectors and they knew packages were being delivered there and they knew all the stash houses were going there, even if they somehow made a mistake in their affidavits or somehow made a mistake in the application, they could have gotten a warrant. It sounds like they had more than enough for probable cause. So even if there was some sort of problem in the warrant, or even if the cops somehow lied in their affidavits, it sounds like they could have gotten a warrant regardless. So it doesn't seem like it would have made a material difference one way or another. So that's part of my concern too.
There's two different components of it. The primary issues is the procedures around the execution of the warrant. So it's all the tactical decisions that were made that are contrary to at least custom and practice in all cases that I know of like this. And that is the highlighted concern. And that's what I think goes up the food chain, because normally there should have been more supervisory involvement, especially when, they take no-knock warrants very seriously because they're the highest risk to police officers, highest risk to other people. Most departments that I know, they are very careful about that. It gets multiple levels of supervisory review. You have all kinds of surveillance of the property, often for days prior to going in, and definitely the day of. Apparently that didn't even happen here. So it's more that aspect. Now, I think some of the issues, that's what I mean by problems with the warrant. Now, the smaller secondary component is that apparently they had a lot of information they did not include in the warrant. And the reason why that's significant, it's just that people were a little taken back that a warrant that thin could authorize a no-knock warrant after midnight.
Yeah, that's true.
So, and the Breonna Taylor supporters or skeptics of the police here would say they think that a lot of this was discovered after the fact by Louisville Police Department trying to put together a better argument than they actually had available to them at the time of the warrant. In other words, they went back and listened to all the audio with the defendant, everything that was done, started leaking that in multiple places. I don't know whether that's true or not true. I know the audio pre-existed it. I don't know whether they listened to it or not. I do know when I first read the warrant, I thought it was thin. For a no-knock warrant. I thought it should have been much thicker. But I put most of that blame on the judge. A magistrate should look at this and say, okay, I know they see more warrants than anybody, more warrants than a lot of the cops drafting warrants. And they should have said, hey, come back with this and this and this and this before we do this, this, and that. And I think the Louisville police power structure is trying to protect the judge and protect the hierarchy. And the mayor's trying to make political points. And that's why a lot of this information was withheld from the public in part.
Well, Robert, can I just want to stop one because, all right, sometimes when you get these warrants, you're right. The warrant was hell of a thin. It was thin for no knock. I would agree with you 110%. You should not have gotten a no knock for this. But I think if this judge signed, because usually you go back to the judge who signed those other 3 warrants, right? Hey, this is a stash house, and if that judge sometimes, and this does happen. It's happened to me where the judge looks at it and doesn't really read this particular, because the judge is supposed to read each warrant individually. That judge doesn't read this warrant. He kind of just assumes, well, it's a her in this case, assumes those other warrants are just like this warrant, and then authorizes a no knock. But you're right. If you just look at this warrant independent of those other warrants, this was definitely not a no knock warrant. And I think that's more of what would happen instead of, I think this judge just said, if this is with these other cases, go ahead, no knock. And boom, that's where you get your mistake.
I think she also turned down the warrant on the baby mama based on conversations that they later released. The main drug defendant target was surprised they didn't raid her. There's been discussions that there was originally a 5th property they were going to hit that they didn't hit. I suspect that that's what the judge in her mind was doing. She was like, okay, this is just the girlfriend. My guess is she was a money mule in the business. In other words, she was a place he could stash some cash. He was a place she could be up front, basically, for certain. But particularly given the kind of comments he's making later on, how these guys keep talking on jail phones after the fact, I don't understand. Like I said, everybody, never in writing and always in cash. Also, don't talk on a recorded phone call. But he hints at that. He hints at that consistently. Now, he was ticked off because people were blaming him for Breonna's death, but he kept hinting, well, she's doing this for more than me. And that would be my guess. But it's still an unfortunate incident that I think could have been avoided with better policing. That doesn't mean the 2 cops who did the shooting didn't have self-defense as a defense.
Kurt, I saw you wanted to say something a few seconds ago. Okay, so here's my question. When you bring it up, well, first of all, someone had the comment, do you think the police were there to shake them down and it went bad, hence no money?
Not these 3 cops, because they had nothing to do with the case.
They didn't even know what they were going in for most
of them. This is the question. Now, I mean, Nate, Kurt, Robert, I don't know the answer. With the warrant being so thin, is it thin because the cops are lazy, because they're doing it rushed, because they've gotten into bad habits in terms of not having to justify warrants enough, or because they know the judges don't really read the warrants anyhow and just sort of give them a rubber stamp? Like, I don't know what the practice is, but
it has to be poor supervisors. Your average cop will often come up with just the basic facts, doesn't want to get into doesn't want to sit, they hate paperwork already. They don't want to spend 10 hours, 20 hours, 30 hours just looking at the 4th ranked priority property on the warrant. This was always the bottom of their priorities. The stash house was much more important. Hitting the drug deal was much more important, et cetera. This was just, maybe we'll get lucky with this last property. And so that's on the supervisors. So it's almost, in every case I've had, a civil rights case, the supervisors are the good ones. They're meaningfully involved. They're constantly reviewing. If we compare, say, that's why there's red flags with the FISA cases involving General Flynn. A lot of reviews that normally happen somehow wasn't happening, which was a warning sign. Normally they're very involved, because your line cop, particularly like these cops, I don't know how many warrants they may have done, the guys that are on the drug force. It couldn't have been too many warrants because they weren't even going to be the guys to enter. So that tells me that, at least as far as I know, unless they're entering at one of the other properties. So I have some doubts that these guys, my view is it's all on the supervisors, almost guaranteed when they dig into the evidence. It would also explain why the city of Louisville Police Department was anxious to throw these guys under the bus.
I wanted to return to an earlier comment where it was pointed out that when you're doing no-knock warrants, they tend to be reviewed internally within the police force at many different levels of review. And so maybe what happened here is that they were planning these multiple simultaneous raids. And one of them, they wanted to do a no-knock raid at night. So they were initially planning their logistics around that, because they're going to do these multiple simultaneous raids. And then as part of that internal review process, they decide, well, actually, no, we don't want to do it anyway. But since we've already planned the logistics for this particular time, we'll go ahead and execute the knock warrant at this time, along with the simultaneous other raids. So again, it seems like there's reasons that it could be done this way. We want to hit multiple places all at the same time. We have to coordinate all the officers to be there at the same time, do all these raids at the same time. We have this internal review process, and we decide, you know what, after all, let's not do this one no knock, but we want to execute at the same time because we're trying to get everyone as part of the common, criminal enterprise. And so that's how it seems like it could have come together to me.
Yeah, and that would be fine, except you either do a no knock and ram, or you knock and announce. You don't do a knock and ram. That's the problem. So as Nate says, that's the police version of events. That's not how actual police, the TV version of events. That's not how the police do things, because they know it causes these problems. If there's no point the ram is just going to terrify everybody inside, and they're going to panic, and they're going to be ready to shoot you when you walk in.
So you think that when you have a knock and announce warrant, if no one opens the door, that you should just go away?
No, you
instead
wait.
Of breaching,
you give a reasonable interval, especially if you're doing it. Let's say your theory is the reason for the timing is at 12:30 is because they're doing the others that are no knock at 12:30. Okay, but if you're going to do no knock at 12:30, and I've seen a lot of these done, they do not use the ram very quickly at all. They'll knock and then they'll knock and they'll knock, and they can attest to this. Usually it'll be a minute. It'll be some reasonable interval.
I think that was what was testified to. Maybe it was the AG, but I seem to remember someone was saying it was a minute from the time they started knocking to the time they used the ram. That seemed to be the time frame that someone was saying.
Well, I would say generally, if you sometimes you do use a ram for a knock and announce warrant, but what happens is you're banging on the door. Open up, police. Everybody knows it's police, and it's not as this structured craziness. It's police, open the door. The police are out here. Open the door. We have a warrant. Everyone knows, and then we keep banging police, and then we use the rip. So there's no question who's begging on your door, who's trying to get in, and that's when you use the ram. So you're right. Fair. So there are occasions, but the reason why I think, and I agree with Robert, the time frame, 12 o'clock, banging on someone's door, and they banged a couple of times and then use the ram. And now people are saying now you have some people saying we heard them say police. Some people saying that we didn't hear police. I'm thinking they went in, we got a no knock, but let's just knock. They knocked, bad police tactics, right? They knock like, oh shit, nobody's opening the door. Let's just ram it, right? We got a no knock. And when they jumped the gun, now it's a question. What, did they say police? Did they not say police? Was he scared? Was he not scared? Again, bad police tactics lead to bad use of force. I'll just say this: if they went in as a no knock, Breonna Taylor would likely still be alive today.
Oh yeah,
that's just the facts of the matter.
Yeah, and especially overwhelming force. Not two guys walking in to see what's happening.
Yeah,
it's the combination. In other words, they created. They used the stash house, trap house mechanism for a house they knew probably wasn't a trap house. And I get, okay, we want to hit this fourth house because maybe we'll get lucky and we want to do it at the same time. But once you do that, you either have to stay with everything with no knock, with plain clothes and going in fast with overwhelming force, or you've got to completely reverse course and do knock and announce and have some plainclothes people there. Have some uniform people there and so forth. Because otherwise you're going to create exactly this situation. And let's put it this way. If you thought there was a chance there was a guy in there with a gun, you mean if four guys in there with a gun, those cops are dead by the way they went in there. So it's a mini miracle there aren't more dead people here, frankly. It's a mini miracle the guy that shot back isn't dead. It's a mini miracle the people next door. There were several bullets that went through, and they however it went through, that means it's a cheap apartment building in all likelihood, not surprising, thin walls, went through the wall, went into the wall of the neighboring family and apparently out, according to what I've seen so far. So that's why this was not there's reasons why these police rules and tactics are in place. It's to avoid things like this happening. And it's very rare that things like this happen if police tactics were good.
And then I'm going to bring this comment up here. Little Rock says, is it a lawyer thing to read all these investigative reports and recording transcripts? This show is the first to mention the jail transcripts of phone calls. Did you laugh when you read mom saying, I am speaking code? No, but it might be, this will be a good time to say, well,
nobody's going to confuse these guys from the characters from The Wire. No. They are clearly not. I honestly was less impressed. I was like, these clearly are not big time. If they are big time people, Louisville has a low standard of drug dealer, because these guys should just watch The Wire, for crying out loud. I couldn't believe the things they were saying on the phone, particularly the dealer. That's why you hustle. That's why you smuggle in the burner phone. This is not brain surgery, folks. I guarantee you there's plenty of burner phones inside the Louisville jail. It's less than it's a bad comedy. It's a
But let me
Fargo style.
But let me keep it 100. Like when I was at both the Bronx DA's office and when I was at Brooklyn, I would say this: we had what we call Rikers calls. We had a whole division of people to just listen to Rikers calls. Now, I'll tell you from my experience, listen to Rikers calls. What I found, I've had people, they confess to rapes, homicides, drug deals. They tell you where the evidence is, and there's a big sign over the phone that says this call will be recorded. Do not, it says all that, and you will not believe. They talk in code. They don't believe we know what the codes are. Yo, you send it to the stash. Look, my first Rikers call, right? I'm listening to the call. They said, well, he has 2 hours worth of phone calls. Just see if the guy, it was a sexual assault. And he was like, just see if he says something. So he's talking to his friend. Yeah. So the friend's like, you did that. And the guy's like, yeah. She didn't want to give it up. So I'm like, why would you say this on the phone? And the sign is right there. So don't think criminals are criminal. They're stupid for a reason. I will say this: they will give you the whole thing right there in a handbasket on a recorded line. It just happens. It's just what they do.
The point I always make is there's a theory out there that criminals have lower IQ, and that partially explains things. And I always tell people those are studies of caught criminals. So it is definitely the case that caught criminals with poor defense lawyers will admit to all kinds of things. None of my clients ever got caught saying anything on a jail phone. Not once they were my clients. So that's all I'm not going to go further. But hey, the show Power. I mean, it's out there, folks. There's ways to handle communication. There's ways not to handle communication. And don't ever talk on the prison phone.
Question here from Robert Atkinson. Wish I could give more. Don't worry about it, Robert. Thank you very much. Do the police not use defensive hollow point ammo? How are bullets going through walls? Who's the one to answer this question? I have no idea.
Well, I can only speak in New York. They do use hollow points. So I'm not sure what they do. That's in Kentucky. I'm assuming they do because hollow points don't go. Well, they usually don't go through. Body, flesh, and I think what's it called? Not concrete. What's it called? Sheetrock, as easily. But again, I'm not sure what they use in Kentucky.
I'm sure there's massive standard gaps between New York and there will probably not between New Orleans and Louisville, but there would be between New York and Louisville. I mean, New York, because of its experience with civil rights suits, because of all the rest, have some of the best procedures in place. But like as a civil rights lawyer, I get to always use New York standards because every other police department has access to them. So it's the way you can prove a Monell claim, what's called a Monell claim, custom and practice. All I know is I've rarely seen a $12 million settlement before you even get to discovery.
That's
a high amount of money, folks.
Rare.
So there's something Louisville's sitting on, but they're not going to be able to keep it from the U.S. Attorney's Office. But the U.S. Attorney's Office is controlled by Mitch McConnell's, just like the Attorney General's office is. So the skeptics, the cynics out there, may say that nothing will come of it. At a minimum, the Louisville PD clearly thought that they would be able to dodge a bullet by never letting that discovery out there. Because I guarantee you Crump would have put it out there in one way, shape, or form. I'm not always a fan of Crump, but he's skilled at what he does.
Okay, I think we want to leave some mystery for Nate's video, which is going to drop tomorrow, and which will be in high definition and not the pixelated Nate that we see now, because I think Nate's on the slowest internet speed. Things are looking good in Canada. I can see all of my fingers at least.